Now that we understand availability zones and how those fit into the Azure global infrastructure and work with regions, let's talk about key services that support high availability in Azure, more specifically that support availability zones. So in the last video, we saw that we could go into the portal, launch a virtual machine. And so regardless of whether that's Linux or Windows, we can target availability zones as long as the region actually supports availability zones. So again, depending on when you watch this video, that'll determine whatever region that you're working with, whether or not that has supportive availability zones and if it's actually been rolled out. So check the documentation, check the controls in the portal and make sure that's going to work for you. Another construct that supports availability zones is virtual machine scale sets. So again, you're probably wondering, well, we just talked about virtual machines, but scale sets, as we'll see coming up later in this course, are kind of a different animal. They work a little bit differently than individual virtual machines. It's a elastic group of virtual machines that can grow and shrink based on the resource utilization of our servers. So this is an interesting capability, and we'll take a look at this in more detail later, but keep in mind this does support the availability zone architecture in Azure. Now, when it comes to working with virtual machines and their storage, managed disks are also something that supports multiple availability zones. And if you haven't really worked with managed disks, the idea here is that Microsoft is going to take care of provisioning the storage accounts and basically making sure that the VHDs, the virtual hard disks for your virtual machines, are placed into the right storage accounts and that you're not going to exceed any limits in terms of capacity or IOPS. And it's basically a way for you to just forget about storage accounts when you're dealing with virtual machines. So that's the default for virtual machines. And when you're using managed disks, that supports multiple availability zones as well. Now, like we saw in the last video, we had virtual machines in different availability zones. And without a load balancer, that might not be super useful. So the good news is the Azure load balancer and public IP address resources support multiple availability zones. Just keep in mind that with the Azure load balancer, there's a free tier that does not support multiple availability zones. But if you're willing to spend a little bit of money, you can basically stretch the application across multiple availability zones with a load balancer and using public IP address resources. Now, when it comes to working with Azure storage, something that we'll look at in more detail later, the zone redundant storage capability supports multiple availability zones as well. So this gives you that ability to make use of the availability zone infrastructure with your storage account. So you get redundancy at the storage layer. And on top of that, the Azure SQL database service supports high availability and basically the availability zone architecture as well. And we'll take a look at that in more detail, but it's very easy to make SQL Server databases highly available on the Azure platform. And for those of you that are working with applications, you're building applications from scratch, you're building IoT-based applications or mobile applications, the Event Hubs infrastructure and the service bus here in Azure also have a construct working with availability zones, and it supports that architecture. Finally, something that we'll take a look at in networking is the fact that the VPN gateway resource and the express route infrastructure in the Azure platform are also different services that support this high availability model. So if you're thinking about architecting an application using virtual machines and databases and storage and networking on the Azure platform, you can see that we've got quite a bit of support here, these services natively supporting high availability and availability zones. So it's really easy for you to build a highly available application. We're going to see more reference architectures as we move forward. Next up, we're going to take a look at another important design concept using the Azure global infrastructure, and that's working with Azure paired regions.